I don't trust Chinese brands, except one. If you spend any time on Reddit, you have seen that sentence. It shows up on Buy It For Life. It shows up on the iPhone subreddit. It shows up on the Android phones subreddit. Every few days, somebody types it out again. And the exception, almost every single time, is the same name. Anker. Go search best power bank or best charger worth buying on any of those subreddits. The top voted answer will almost always include Anker, and honestly, this should not be happening. For the last 2 decades, made in China has, in the American consumer's head, been roughly synonymous with cheap and good enough. Not premium, not trusted, definitely not the thing you proactively recommend to your friend at brunch. But Anker is the exception. Wirecutter is the New York Times product review arm, the publication American middle-class buyers go to before they trust a category. Wirecutter has kept Anker on its best portable charger list for close to a decade now. TechRadar's April 2026 review literally titled itself, "I've tested every Anker charger, and these are the 3 I'd actually buy." Not considered, not compared. Actually buy. That is the language of a reviewer who is no longer treating this brand as a price option. They are treating it as a default. Here is the part that is genuinely strange. Apple, a company so paranoid about its own ecosystem that it spent a decade getting accessory partners certified, now stocks Anker chargers on the physical shelves of Apple stores in the US. Anker is fully MFI certified, meaning it carries Apple's official made for iPhone stamp. There is no other Chinese consumer brand that has cleared that bar at any meaningful scale. In 2024, the United States imported about $440 billion worth of goods from China. Scale has never been the problem. Trust is. Most of those imports flowed into American homes through Amazon search ads, white label resellers, and, compatible with listings, products the end consumer never actually remembers buying from a brand. So today's story is about how, over 14 years, one company peeled the made in China equals cheap label off itself in the United States, the single hardest market on the planet to do that in. And then, in 2022, it nearly threw that whole thing away in one consumer privacy scandal. Wu-Freen only CTA hold 3. S-Screen only CTA hold 3. 2011. This is Stephen Yang, 29 years old, engineer at Google's search ranking team, Peking University class of 1999, computer science, UT Austin for his master's in 2005, then Google. By 2011, 4 years in, he was on the search ranking team, the team that decides what billions of queries get back. Stephen Yang did not just work at Google. He won the Google Founders Award, the highest internal engineering honor the company gives out, reserved for engineers who ship something that materially moved the business. That is roughly the top 1% of Google's already top percentile engineering pool. Not a recruiter line. A documented internal honor, reported by Bloomberg in 2018. At this point, the expected path is stay at Google, vest your stock, maybe join a series, a startup as a senior engineer. That is the textbook Silicon Valley move. Yang did not do that. Late 2011, he quit Google, and his next move was, by any reasonable measure, counterintuitive. He wanted to replace the battery in his ThinkPad laptop. So he went on Amazon, ran a search, and what he found was a market split cleanly in 2. On one end, the original manufacturer battery, around $100, 4.5 stars. Totally reliable, ridiculously overpriced. On the other end, no, name knockoffs. $20, 3.5 stars. Review after review saying swelled up in 3 months and smelled like burning plastic. $20 on one side, $100 on the other. Nothing in between. To Yang, an engineer who had spent 4 years thinking about market signals at Google, that gap was not a gap. It was a market mispricing. His response? He flew back to China, walked into A-grade lithium cell factories in Shenzhen, the same cells used by major OEMs at the time. He bought them, brought them to his workbench in Changsha, designed his own laptop battery pack around them, and prepared to list it on Amazon. He registered the brand under a name he picked deliberately. Anker, German for anchor. From day one, the brand was built to read as global, not Chinese. The startup capital came from his mother. She was a retired pharmaceutical industry worker, and she handed over her retirement savings. In 2018, Bloomberg ran a profile on the company with one of the best headlines you will ever read: How to Turn Your Mom's Savings into $1 billion. When Anker started selling on Amazon in 2011, the conventional wisdom in cross-border e-commerce circles was clear. A former Google engineer running an Amazon brand would inevitably game the algorithm. Reviews, keywords, ranking hacks, that was the playbook. Stephen Yang did the exact opposite. He banned SEO inside the company, no keyword stuffing, no review farms, no fake review buys. White hat or black hat both got the same answer, no. Why? Because Yang had spent years inside Google's search ranking team. He had seen, from the inside, what later became public in the 2023 US versus Google antitrust trial, a system internally codenamed NavBoost. NavBoost re-ranks results based on what users actually do after they click, how long they stay, whether they bounce back, whether they refine the search. In other words, real user behavior is the silent judge. Now translate that lesson from Google search ranking to Amazon product ranking. The conclusion is identical. If your product genuinely makes customers happy, the algorithm will reward you. If it does not, no amount of keyword tricks will save you. So Anker turned that into a hard internal metric. Every product had to maintain a minimum 4-5-star rating on Amazon. Below that threshold, the product team would iterate until it cleared the bar. Customers complained the power banks were too bulky. Anker made one the size of a lipstick. People hated juggling separate cables for different devices. Anker designed a single universal one. Cheap cables kept fraying near the connector. Anker introduced steel core cables that could famously tow a car. And then, because they had a sense of humor, they filmed a viral ad of an Anker cable physically towing a sedan down a road. By 2013, Anker was #1 in Amazon's charging category. And they never gave that position up. By 2014, they had shipped their first patented charging technology, Power IQ. It was a protocol that automatically detected what device you plugged in and adjusted current accordingly. This was 2014. The phrase made in China was no longer carrying the connotation cheap alternative, at least not in the US charging category. Anker was now a brand with real technical differentiation. For iPhone owners, October 2020 was a slightly annoying month. For a Chinese brand that had spent 9 years preparing for exactly this kind of opening, it was the biggest gift the iPhone ecosystem had ever quietly handed to an outsider. That month, Apple launched the iPhone 12. And buried in the keynote was the news that, citing environmental reasons, Apple was no longer going to ship a charger or earbuds in the iPhone box. Anker, by that point, was already a fully MFI certified supplier. MFI stands for Made for iPhone. It is Apple's official accessory program. To get the MFI stamp on your charger or cable, you have to clear Apple's electrical compatibility testing, source the exact authentication chip Apple designs, and meet Apple's manufacturing quality standards. Most third-party accessories on Amazon are not MFI. Anker is. So starting with the iPhone 12 launch, Apple stores in the United States began stocking Anker chargers and cables on their physical shelves, next to Apple's own first-party accessories. Same retail furniture, same white shelving, just a different brand on the box. Stop and actually sit with that for a second. Apple, the most ecosystem-paranoid hardware company on the planet, actively chose Anker as the accessory it was comfortable putting on its own retail shelves, under its own roof, where the buyer was already in "I trust this store" mode. There is no other Chinese consumer brand that has cleared that bar at that scale. Not at the time. And in 2026, still not. From that moment, the phrase Chinese brand picked up a new annotation entirely in the American consumer's head. That same year, Anker went public on Shenzhen's Chinex exchange under the ticker 300866. Opening price was 60 yuan. By the end of the trading day, it was over 200. The market reaction was less Chinese hardware brand IPOs and more. The US consumer trust thesis has been priced in dollars first, RMB second. It was that Wirecutter list. When the magazine American Middle-Class Consumers Trust Most has been recommending your product category for years, every other surface in the trust pipeline follows. Apple stores, MFI shelves, Reddit threads, they all align downstream. But the thesis cannot end here. If you stop the story at chapter 4, you are telling a corporate fairy tale. The real version is that in 2022, Anker walked face first into a wall, and it was a wall they had built themselves. In November of 2022, a British security researcher named Paul Moore posted a video online. He had bought several Eufy security cameras, which is Anker's home security camera sub-brand, and decided to take a close look at how they actually handled user video. The entire marketed selling point of Eufy was, and I quote, "asterisk local storage only, no cloud uploads asterisk." That promise was the brand. That was the reason a privacy-conscious American household would pick a Eufy camera over a Ring or a Nest. That was the wedge. Moore's video demonstrated two things, both of them ugly. One, even when users explicitly disabled all cloud storage settings, Eufy cameras were quietly uploading thumbnails to AWS, and those thumbnails contained facial recognition snapshots of whoever the camera saw. Two, and this was the much worse one, he demonstrated that you could open another person's Eufy camera livestream in VLC Media Player just by knowing or guessing the camera's URL. No password, no authentication, no re-encryption. Over the next 2 weeks, every major American tech outlet picked up the story. Mac Rumors, 9 to 5 Google, Tom's Guide, Slashdot, Gizmodo. The framing was uniform. This is a home security camera that has been advertising privacy as its main feature, and the privacy claim is structurally false. Anker's response came in two distinct steps. Step 1. They admitted it. They confirmed face thumbnails were being uploaded with cloud storage disabled. They confirmed the livestream URLs were not properly protected. They committed to fixing both. Step 2, and this is the part that hurt. In December of 2022, they quietly edited the Eufy privacy promise page on their official website. The phrase local storage only was removed and replaced with a vaguer storage. For a company that had spent 11 years building a reputation on quality plus dependability, this was a serious self-inflicted wound. The word dependable means the customer does not have to read your fine print. They do not have to worry about what your settings actually do. They do not have to wonder if your privacy promise survives software updates. Anker had spent 11 years building exactly that kind of dependability in the charger category. In one quarter, on the camera category, they had spent that down significantly. Why am I spending this much time on the Eufy scandal? Because this is the actual inflection point of the entire Anker thesis. Chapters 1 through 4 were the brand trust accumulation story. This chapter is the brand trust erosion story, and you cannot honestly tell either without telling both. Anker did not go silent. They published detailed technical responses to Moore's findings. They committed to migrating all camera authentication to WebRTC with proper end-to-end encryption. They added explicit user-controlled toggles for any cloud upload behavior. From a technical execution standpoint, the response was substantial and visible. From a brand trust standpoint, the damage was different. American consumers do not parse. They fixed it within 90 days. They parse. They were quietly lying about local storage. The Eufy privacy litigation eventually walked straight into the United States court system. As of at least July 2025, there is an active multi-district class action consumer privacy case in the U.S. that names Anker and Eufy as defendants. The legal exposure is real, ongoing, and, by the standards of American product liability law, not particularly fast to clear. On the media recommendation front, though, they did claw back partial repair. By 2024, Wirecutter's stance on Eufy was no longer a clean recommend, but it was also no longer do not buy. The framing became useful product, lock down the settings yourself, treat the local storage promise as a feature you have to enforce, not one the brand will enforce for you. That is not the language Wirecutter uses for products it fully trusts, but it is a language meaningfully better than a permanent column in the deceptive marketing file. They avoided getting permanently nailed into the deceptive brand column. Building Anker into a global powerbank champion took 9 years. Realizing they could not infinitely copy-paste that playbook into every adjacent consumer category, and then admitting it publicly, took 2 more. When Anker IPO'd in 2020, Yang internally announced a strategy he called Shallow C. The logic went like this. Consumer electronics is structurally a deep sea, meaning consumer brands compete head-on with massive incumbents like Apple, Samsung, and Sony in saturated, deeply marketed categories. Anker's edge, shallow consumer research cycles, fast iteration off real user complaints, manufacturing depth in Shenzhen did not survive intact in those deep waters. So Anker would deliberately fish the shallow ones, adjacent consumer hardware categories that were big enough to support a profitable brand, but small enough that incumbents had not bothered to build a defensible moat. Internally, those category bets were called PDTs, product domain teams. What followed was the textbook hyper-growth move. Anker went from 1,600 employees to 4,000 inches roughly 2 years. They stood up 27 active PDTs. The PDTs covered energy storage as Anker, Solix, robot lawnmowers, 3D printing under the Eufy Make brand, pet products, electric scooters and e-bikes, outdoor camping gear, smart kitchen appliances, The instinct was correct. Consumer hardware has dozens of underserved categories that could plausibly be the next charger for Anker. But the execution started to fragment. Then in mid-2022, Yang personally took over running one of those divisions. He wanted to see what was actually happening at the PDT layer. And from inside, he realized something most CEOs only see in retrospective postmortems. Multiple PDTs were stepping on each other internally. They were fighting for the same supply chain capacity. They were competing for the same engineering headcount. Some product roadmaps were duplicate. The shallow C approach was structurally sound. But the org had outgrown the operating model that could keep 27 of them coherent. So Yang ran a test. He went to a handful of those teams and said roughly, "You believe in your category? Fine. I will spin you off as an independent company. You take the team. You take the brand. You become founders. Anker becomes a minority investor. You go raise outside capital and run it as your own startup." Almost every single one of them said no. That refusal taught Yang something it took hundreds of millions of dollars in burn to learn. Confidence and category opportunity were not the binding constraint. The binding constraint was operator commitment. Whether the team would still be carrying the same conviction in year 5 and year 7 when the category got hard and the founder energy was no longer free-flowing from Yang himself, and almost nobody at that level wanted to bet their own equity on it. Starting in Q4 2022, Anker began cutting. Across all of 2023, they killed 10 entire product lines. Robot lawnmowers, electric scooters and e-bikes, 3D printers, pet products. Several of the smaller PDTs got folded into existing brands or quietly shut down. The blast radius internally was real, people got reassigned, some left. The growth narrative the IPO had been telling for 2 years had to be partially repriced. After the cuts, the company stabilized. In 2024, Anker posted revenue of 24.71 billion RMB, roughly $3.5 billion US dollars. Net profit was 2.11 billion RMB. Year-over-year revenue growth was 41%. Net profit growth was 30%. The 7 independent direct-to-consumer brand websites generated 2.5 billion RMB combined, up 101% year-over-year. That was a 10% share of the company's total revenue, doubled in 12 months, which meant Anker was no longer purely Amazon-dependent. They had built real first-party customer relationships outside the Amazon platform. In the first quarter of 2025, revenue came in at 6 billion RMB, up 37% year-over-year. The shallow C strategy had not died. It had just gotten unmistakably more disciplined. So back to the question we opened this video with. Why is Anker one of the only, maybe the only, Chinese hardware brand that American middle-class consumers actively trust, recommend on Reddit, and let into their Apple Store retail trip without thinking twice? It is not because of their ad spend. When is the last time you saw an Anker Super Bowl commercial? You have not. There has never been one. There is no TED Talk by Stephen Yang. There is no founder hero personal branding tour through Bloomberg interviews. What Yang actually did right is almost embarrassingly singular. He took a Google search engineer's worldview and applied it end-to-end to the consumer hardware game. That worldview reads, in a sentence, in any system that is decided by real users behaving naturally, the only sustainable strategy is to be undeniably the right product and let the system do the ranking for you. That framing was not common sense in the Chinese cross-border e-commerce world of 2011. And honestly, it is still not common sense in 2026. Most cross-border sellers still default to review farms, keyword stuffing, off-platform paid clicks, opaque sub-brand stacking to dodge negative reviews. The flip side of that strategy is harder. When Eufy's privacy scandal hit, Anker could not PR their way out of it. The same Wirecutter and Reddit ecosystem that had spent 11 years quietly endorsing them turned around in 2 weeks and held them accountable. That is what trust actually is. It is the system that gives you free distribution when you behave well, and the same system that publicly punishes you when you do not. If you want the upside, you cannot opt out of the downside. A new generation of Chinese consumer brands is now arriving in US and European retail. According to Frost & Sullivan industry forecasts, the Chinese mobile and consumer electronics overseas market is projected to keep compounding at roughly 14% annually through 2030. They are not all clones. According to IDC, Roborock was the #1 robot vacuum brand globally by both units and revenue in 2024. They also took the #1 slot in the United States for the first time. Dream and Insta360 are similar. Mid-category global brands, real R&D investment, real intellectual property, real Wirecutter coverage, and real Reddit communities recommending them by name. Transsion still held 51% of African smartphone shipments in Q2 2024. Ninebot completed its strategic merger with Segway and now ships under both names. They are no longer the cheap option. They are the option that won. But what Anker's story actually says to every brand following behind it is this. The made in China stigma in American consumer minds is not a permanent fact about America. It is a result of how the previous generation of Chinese exporters behaved on Amazon. It can be beaten, but it gets beaten 145-star review at a time. It gets beaten by times, not times trying to outsmart the algorithm. By making the product good enough that real users want to type your name into a Reddit thread of their own accord, and by being prepared to lose in public the moment you stop behaving that way. It is a very slow thing, but Anker spent 14 years proving that it is at least possible.